I wanted to give you some more in-depth instructions on how to finish the sequin Claudia panties with a clean finish on the inside. So I've gone ahead and I've cut everything out, and I've assembled my back piece by stitching it down the center back seam. I have my gusset cut out of lace and lining, and I have the upper front cut out of sequin fabric and stretch mesh. So I'm going to start by taking my back piece. I've got it right side facing up, and I've got my lace, and I'm working along that curved edge of my gusset, so I'm placing it on top, right sides together. You can pin it in place or you can baste it at this point, but I'm just going to go and flip it over and take my lining side, my gusset lining, sorry, and with the right side of the lining against the wrong side of the panties back, I'm going to sandwich that panties back between the lining and the lace. So the gusset actually extends beyond the scalloped edge of the panties back, and it should do that. I'm going to just stitch it together on my sewing machine. So I don't pin things. I very rarely pin things, but you may want to, especially if it's your first time doing this type of finish. Okay. And when you fold that forward, your seam allowance is encased between those layers, so it's a nice clean finish. So I'm going to flip it over again. I'm working from the straight edge of the gusset with the right side up again. I'm going to take my sequin fabric and lay it over top. So the straight edge of my sequin fabric is against the straight edge of my gusset. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to take my lining, my mesh lining, and the same thing. So my gusset is now sandwiched between my front sequin fabric and my front lining. And I'm going to stitch that together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can serge or you can use your sewing machine. Another thing you may want to do if you're finding that your fabric's a little bulky is to grade the seam allowance back. And basically all you have to do is you just take your first layer and you trim it really close to your stitching line, which is kind of a pain when you're working with sequin fabric. And you go through your next layer and you trim it so that it's slightly longer than the first. And then just trim the last layer again so it's just slightly longer than the last layer. You could also use pinking shears on that area. Okay, so when I lay that forward, that's all nicely finished. So from the inside, there's no scratchy seams. I want to finish this so that the seam allowance is encased between the lining and the sequin fabric. I want to do this because the cut edge of the sequin fabric can be very scratchy, and it would be really uncomfortable if we didn't do it this way. I've been working with sequin fabric for a few years now, so I've kind of learned the hard way, the best way to sew sequin fabric on lingerie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just fold back my lining, and I'm gonna baste my seam together. So the right sides are together, and I'm allowing my sequin fabric to extend beyond the scalloped edge of my panties back by about 1/4 of an inch. And this will be important for adding elastic on in the next step. So I'm going to baste this together. So that was just my sequin fabric and the back panties piece. So you can see here, they're basted together and this lining is still loose. So I'm going to then grab my lining and this basted seam that I've done, and I'm going to put the right side of the lining against the lace side of my seam, so it's twisted. So right side of lining is against the wrong side of the lace. And stitch that together. And you'll see when I open this up why I'm doing it this way, this complicated way. If this really confuses you, just do it regular and serge your seam or cover your seam in some way with some binding. Okay, so when I untwist that, my lining covers my scratchy seam allowance. And there it is from the front. My sequin fabric's extending by just a little bit over that scalloped edge. Okay, so this part gets even more tricky because we're working with such a small area. So I'm taking just my sequin fabric and I'm going to baste it so it's right sides together. The sequin fabric extends beyond my scalloped edge by about 1/4 of an inch. 1/2 inch seam allowance. I stitch right through my sequins. You might want to go slow because sometimes the sequins can cause your needle to break or bend. And I also had sequin shrapnel fly at me, so I often joke about needing to wear safety glasses. Okay, so here we are. This seam is basted together and my lining is still loose. So I'm going to fold that seam allowance of my lining under. And I'm going to pinch that seam allowance together, that newly basted seam allowance with my lining. And I pull it through the top. So the right side of my lining is facing the wrong side of my lace. And it's just a twisted mess right now. But you'll see when I unravel it how nicely finished it is on the inside. Okay, so untwist that. And here's our inside. No scratchy seams anywhere. And our outside is like that. So the next step is to add a little bit of elastic around this edge and our waist elastic.